Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to the session on Chief that's going to be given by Chief Data Office for the Employment and Social Development Canada, Ema Okonny. We're very privileged to have her speak to the topic. It's certainly a very complex, it's a large organization, and at the same time, a very complex one. Okay. Ema is the Chief Data Officer at Employment and Social Development Canada. It's evolved over the years. It was formerly known as Human Resource Development Canada. Has over 20 years of experience in the field of data. She's got extensive experience building the evidence base through the development of analytical databases, building analytical tools, implementing departmental data reporting and release strategies, data management, data privacy protocols, and with forward-looking policy development and research. She has an educational background in mathematics, computer programming, and public management. And during her time with the Government of Canada, she has received several nominations and awards for her leadership and results. She's absolutely passionate about developing and empowering multidisciplinary teams to unleash concrete business value from data. Her topic today will be accelerating digital transformation requires the acceleration of data transformation. And without further ado, I turn you over to Ema. Okay, thank you very much for taking the time to present to us.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you so much for highlighting this topic. I think it's a critical topic, not just for the government of Canada, but worldwide. Like, people are struggling in really getting results out of digital transformation. And you can see all kinds of research and studies have shown that the will is there, but there are a lot of failures for us to learn from in terms of people who really wanted to push this forward. So without much ado, I'll jump into my presentation. So first of all, I always like to start from this slide that really talks about the raison d'etre of ESDC, my department. So we basically work on ensuring that we're building an inclusive and stronger Canada and really supporting Canadians all across the country to really live productive and rewarding lives and improving the quality of life of people. This is core to everything we do. And as we think through data in the Chief Data Office, we keep this really close to our hearts. We come into work with the thinking that we need to be able to build, tools, data, to really use data to enhance our service to Canadians. So how do we do this? So within the Chief Data Office, we don't sit in our cubicles or our homes now because we're working virtually. We actually work in partnership across all business lines. We work with internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, and we really want to be able to work with users across the organization to really drive valuable insights, like I said, to support and enable Canadians get to the best outcomes. So we work with our policy colleagues, we work with our operational colleagues, we work with our program colleagues. We also work very closely with Statistics Canada, the Canada Revenue Agency, Immigration and Citizenship Canada. So we work with these groups in order to see how we can really enhance our evidence base and really look at reporting beyond the checkbox mentality, but asking ourselves, are we really doing a good job? Are we reaching the people we need to reach? What exactly are we missing as we try to enhance the benefits we're giving to those who need it most across the country? And we want to be able to assess the impact of what we're doing. Like, are we doing it right? Are we reaching vulnerable groups? Are we reaching people in remote communities? How are we serving those that are in rural areas versus urban areas? Are we reaching our Indigenous populations? Are we reaching persons with disabilities? Are there any barriers or hindrances for them to really get the services that they really deserve? And are we doing our due diligence in terms of data sharing? Are we being transparent with Canadians? Are we sharing data in a way that people can digest the information? How are we really sharing data with the provinces and territories? Because there's a dependence there. Like, if we decide to implement a policy, there are direct implications on the provinces, on the cities. So part of what we've really been thinking through is how do we systematically share data in a way that adds value, not only to ESDC, but also to some of our key stakeholders in the provinces and the territories. We also look at program uptake. Who's really looking at our programs? Who needs it? Who isn't applying? What do we need to adjust in terms of our policies, our services? So this is an ongoing, continuous activity that needs data. And there's also the piece around results reporting, where we're reporting on our results. You know, we need to be able to be accountable to Canadians in terms of the money we're spending. And this became very, very clear with the pandemic, because when the pandemic hit, we had to immediately really start up a benefit, the SERB, to support Canadians. And the questions we were receiving from the media, from basically people across the country is, are you really reaching those who need the SERB? How are women doing? How are young women doing? How are the youth doing? Are they able to access some of these benefit programs? Because the job losses, as you can see from the numbers, um, grew rapidly with all the lockdowns and the impacts of the pandemic. So we were being asked questions like, how are visible minorities doing? How are racialized Canadians doing? How are Indigenous Canadians doing? And we needed to be able to respond to some of these questions. And as you know, we won't be able to do this without extensive collaboration across the government of Canada. We had to quickly work with Statistics Canada to look at data linkages so that we were able to report on social demographic characteristics of people who received SERB. And we also have an obligation at the end to look at the audit of the program and the evaluation of the program. All this needs data. So the need and the value of data is not the question. The question is more, how can we do this and meet all these diverse needs in a systematic way, while also doing our due diligence to protect the privacy and confidentiality of Canadians and not compromise them in terms of exposing some of their data to cyber attacks. As you know, I mean, we open the newspaper, it's no longer a newspaper. Basically, you click on the internet link, you go on the news, and you hear all these stories about cyber attacks. You know, there's so much nefarious activities happening around data. And it is our utmost responsibility to ensure that we're doing our due diligence to protect Canadians' information. So all this requires us to apply defensive and offensive strategies around data on an ongoing basis. The other factor is, as things change, the context changes, as policy changes, as the demographic characteristics of Canada changes, we have to be ready. We have to be ready to support Canadians, and we have to be ready to evolve with these contexts. So some of the common principles that we apply within the Chief Data Office is, we need to be able to provide ethical and unbiased data analysis and advice. We need to be able to be responsive. Like I said, things are changing, client needs are changing. And if you look at the journey of a client, we go through so much change and so much phases. So how do we use data to support the evolving policy, service context, and human condition context? The other thing we look at too is, like I said, with all the cybersecurity risks, the challenges around privacy and confidentiality, how do we provide data that is secure, properly curated, and easy to use and leverage across the enterprise? The other thing we look at is to really strengthen the value of data as an asset through collaboration and partnership. And we do this through continuously showing the art of the possible. We continuously work with different groups across the organization to show the potential power of data when it's used properly. Um, the other thing we do is we also work on building a strong, innovative, and engaged data analytics culture within the organization. We've done this by building a data literacy curriculum. We have engagements across the organizations. We usually have a community of practice where we bring all the data different data groups across the organization to really look at some of the best practices, for example, around data visualizations. Something as really you would say is really less complex than anything like data visualizations. It's always interesting to watch people present and talk about all the different considerations they take into account as they build dashboards. So we find that those real practical discussions around best practices, actual concrete projects that people have built and can discuss really lead to increased engagement, more innovative thinking, and really helps us to mature our data culture. Within ESDC, we have like over 20,000 employees, and across the organization, we have people working on data and analytics projects. And the key is to be able to orchestrate some of these activities. So what we've tried to do is to really build a community, like a growing community, where people feel that, yeah, they might be working on one particular analysis, like for example, the EI program, but they're connected to the broader horizontal piece at the CDO level. So we're working on this, and I will say none of this is at a level of perfection or nirvana yet. But the ideal is that the will is there, and we have a lot of engaged and very, very intelligent people across the enterprise who we work very closely with. So I know some of you are asking, wow, this looks like a lot. How do they do this? Like, there's a lot to balance and there's a lot to take in here. So, I mean, I would say on a daily basis as CDO, I have to do the balancing act between the offensive and defensive strategies. And I put a whole bunch of boxes here to just show some of the balancing act I do as people come and request data, or they come to me and ask if we can look at some program monitoring data or some performance monitoring data, or just look at some of the finer details around the characteristics of beneficiaries who we've supported through the years. One of the big considerations is a legal consideration. As you know, we have our act, which is called DESDA, and a lot of our data activities are guided by some of these legal considerations. There's also the Privacy Act, the challenge around really cybersecurity and making sure that we've done our due diligence there. Sorry about that. There's the governance and stewardship standards, ethical considerations, data curation, data sharing, automation, innovation, applying innovative data methods, advanced analytics. And I could speak for hours about each of these bucks I have mentioned here. It's a whole topic of itself. But the key is I can't leave any of this out as I really consider today in current state how to move forward on some of the pieces we need to move forward within the data context, because they will be significant implications if we make decisions, for example, on the outcome of a client without really thinking about some of the ethical considerations. Like, for example, if I have a data set and I'm using this data set to make decisions around the outcome of a client when it comes to a benefit, for example, I need to be able to ensure that I have applied accurate data and ensure that the client is reaching the best outcome for that particular client. So that would require me ensuring that the data I'm using is properly curated, is representative of the population. I need to be able to ensure that I've applied the right standards to this data. Like, if I'm saying this person is from a certain part of the country or meets a certain list of qualifications, is this consistent? Does it make sense? If I'm saying that, I want to be able to automate this person triaging from one program to another program, am I sure that I've applied all the necessary regulatory requirements to make this decision? So again, that requires me having quality data that's been standardized, that's been properly curated. And none of this is a one and done thing. It's something that's ongoing. You can see the box on the right, on my right, I don't know if it's on your right too, but it talks about the evolving context. So within the evolving context, that's where we have things that are changing as we speak, emerging risks that we've probably not even anticipated, shifting expectations. The expectations of Canadians for quicker service is growing. People expect to be able to click a button and get their benefit, or get to understand transparently why you've made a decision around their benefit. Technology is changing every day. Technology is shifting. As we look at things like more innovative data methods, like things like artificial intelligence, we look at machine learning, it's shifting. And part of the expectation grows because of the ability for a client to get a lot of these tools as they work through different services they're offered in the private sector. From a government of Canada perspective, how can I meet up with some of these needs, given all these other considerations that I have to balance every day? And then there's also the issue around impact and outcomes. So as we serve Canadians and we really deliver on some of our commitments, that helps grow trust. It will build the trust in basically the ability of the government to deliver. And that in turn makes it easier for us to really move forward with some of the vision we have around data and the use of data. So how do we do this in a way that's transparent, informing Canadians, and then at the same time ensuring that we're doing our due diligence as we go through some of the privacy and legal considerations? The other thing is the demographics. The demographics is a big factor within ESDC as we think about data, because we're all about people. And it is evident that our population, the demographics is changing. We're having an aging population. We're also having an impact on immigration. Immigration coming in, immigration flows are changing. So how does this all change everything in blue? It changes a lot around the expectation of us to become more digital. It might shift some of the mindset about the time lag between how we do things, how we determine benefits, people's expectations around privacy. How also do we look at organizational readiness? So all these factors have a big role to play in how we think through data strategies. And in my mind, I think that there's an opportunity, there is a huge, significant opportunity for us to really think through these items in a more proactive way as we look at digital transformation. And the opportunity there is to do a lot of these by design as we build out in digital transformation, and remove some of the focus on the technology and the flashy tools, but think through the vision about where we want to go in terms of how we want to improve services to Canadians, and how we can use data to really drive us to some of those outcomes in meeting the expectations that are growing every day in terms of service delivery. So, I mean, I talked about the opportunity, and I see this clearly in terms of the need for data transformation. And then you might ask me, like, what do you mean by data transformation? So when I talk about data transformation, I'm talking about the opportunity that the future state brings us in terms of looking at digital transformation, not just from a technology aspect, in terms of, we need to change all these technological systems and buy new systems, and then all the problems around data will be solved. No, that's not what I'm thinking. So I'm thinking more of the design, like designing data and engineering data that's in a more fundamental way, that's more intentional. And what do I mean by this? So I mean taking a more balanced view in terms of how you're applying risk, privacy, security, and ethics by design, as opposed to being reactive in the way we are today. For example, in looking at artificial intelligence, there are ways that we can really look at it in a more proactive way in terms of examining the potential impacts on citizens if we say we want to move to a model that's more automated. So why don't we think through how we design our data to enable us be more proactive in terms of assessing the impact of some of these technologies on people? It's possible. We can do it reactively today, but as we look at digital transformation, we can embed it into how we design our engineering flows and our data flows through the system. The other thing I was thinking is, as we look at, designing better programs, really understanding our clients and making sure that we're serving all Canadians across the country and reaching all clients that we need to serve, why don't we look at more consistent, streamlined data flows between systems, leveraging data architecture that's better mapped, that really drives us to be able to do some of the things that we're doing more reactively today and move to a more proactive place. I mean, COVID-19 taught us, and it continues to teach us, that we need to be able to be more targeted in how we serve people across this country. It was very evident that, as the pandemic was at its height, there were communities that were left out in terms of how they were getting care, and the pandemic hit some industries more than others. So how can we design our data flows in future so that we can quickly adapt and shift, and target how we service people, to more like streamlined communities when we know they need it, and then we are able to reverse, and really help people that need it. How do we do this for seniors, for example? Let's say at the height of the pandemic, when we had a lot of nursing homes, being hit so horribly, how can we quickly react if we design systems, for example, in future, where we can target age groups and say, this age group needs more attention right now, so we need to target policies right away, and we can assess the impact of these policies when we design systems that are more streamlined and can really engineer the data flows as we think through our processes. So that's what I meant by the data foundation, like looking at a more, structured and visioned way of really putting this data together, as opposed to remaining in current state where we see our data collection systems as something that's an administrative system to collect data, to issue checks. The other point I wanted to emphasize on was the need to really think through the data as a valuation tool, as opposed to just like this data is this thing that's collected in the system to enable us meet this processing need. We need to be able to look at data as that valuable, I don't want to use basically the phrase everybody's using about data, the new oil, but there are opportunities here to really use data to enable a lot of the cross-cutting analysis and analytics, and use it as a more analytical tool to really enable you hit some of those clients and really enhance their outcomes, and then use it for more proactive data sharing, data evaluation, performance measurement, and use that as you go. As you saw in my previous slide, I emphasize on the evolving context. So you look at the evolving context, we all know this will continue to shift. But what we know will never shift is that we need to understand our clients. So we always need to understand our clients and realize that the demographics will shift on an ongoing basis. So how can we better project for this as opposed to being reactive? And then the third point is more around always remembering to keep the enterprise needs in mind. So the need for that sustained business partnership, because what often happens is we get into our box, we get into that excitement of, I'm doing this exciting digital transformation, and I'm in this box and I'm in this zone, I'm in my echo chamber and everybody agrees with me and we're all high-fiving ourselves. And we forget that there's a whole enterprise context that really needs to be brought into the thinking on digital transformation, in terms of really understanding the context of the business and some of the pain points that they're facing and some of their experiences, like the lived experiences of the operations, that could really inform digital transformation as you kind of think through of how you're going to engineer your data to move ahead. The other thing I've seen that is also important is to look at the art of the possible. When it comes to data, all of us mean different things when we talk about data. There's no consistent view of what exactly we can do with data because it's still an emerging field and there's still a lot of potential there. So what I've found really works is to look at, pilots, look at lighthouse projects to really start showing the art of the possible when it comes to data. We talk about all these wonderful things data can do. So there's a lot of talk, but I think what we need to focus on more is, the actual practical applications of data where you can really use the power of data to impact lives. When people start seeing it and seeing how powerful it can be when it's done right with all the ethical and legal and privacy considerations, it becomes something that's, logical to apply as you look at digital transformation. The other thing is organizational readiness. So I've seen again situations where the organization itself is not really ready for transformation. And what do I mean by that? So I don't want to talk about culture because everybody talks about culture. um, but a lot of that is around really people understanding what we're talking about when we say there's digital transformation, data transformation. It begins to sound like a buzzword, and people don't understand what that really means. So what we've tried to do in the chief data office is try to make that more practical in terms of working with people across the different business lines. So for example, sitting with people and talking through what we mean when we say a data strategy. Also talking through what it means when we say machine learning, text mining, what exactly do those words mean and how do they practically apply to people's jobs? So if you have somebody working through assessing a whole bunch of benefit applications, what does data transformation mean to that person in reality? And how can that really augment some of their work as opposed to replace them? So part of the anxiety is how do you make them understand that data can be an enabler, it can be a driver, it can also be a utility. But then at the end of the day, it'll help them with their work and remove some of the cumbersome parts of their job. So part of that is by really working through some practical examples so people understand what exactly you're talking about. The other thing we've really applied, and I spoke about this earlier, is really looking at putting in place a data literacy curriculum for the organization. So we've worked with organizations in Australia. We've worked with Statistics Canada. We've worked with the Canada School to see how we can really frame a data literacy culture in the organization. And we've also had an executive data literacy workshop within the organization. We've also done a data literacy survey just to try to assess where we are as an organization when it comes to data literacy. Again, I spoke about the data community, the need for a data community, the need for really honing in on upskilling, reskilling. So we often talk about how we need data scientists, we'll need data scientists, but we also need the entire organization, understanding the value of data in really transforming the lives of Canadians and really improving how employees do their work. So a lot of time needs to be spent on this. And some people have grouped some of this on their change management, and just creating that readiness within the organization. But it's a key part that cannot be forgotten when you're thinking about data transformation and digital transformation. So this slide speaks to some of the key initiatives that we've put in place within the Chief Data Office, because what we've seen is yes, there's a need for a data strategy, but like I said, there's a need to make it real for people so people understand what exactly we mean when we say things like data governance, data stewardship. So we have taken some key initiatives, which we're calling our lighthouse projects. And part of that is to amplify some of this into our digital transformation that we're thinking through right now. So for example, on the left of the lighthouse, you'll see some of those key initiatives. We have things like a very focused data inventory. So oftentimes you will hear people say, oh, we are putting together a data inventory, and the data inventory sits there, and after that, nobody really uses it. So what we decided to do is to take a topic. So we basically took a topic within the organization and we said, we need to have a focused data inventory on this topic that really speaks to some of the work that's happening on the operations side, and then also fits some of the high priority needs of the organization in terms of understanding how we can better serve clients in relation to that topic. So we're doing that really collectively across the organization. And what we found is there's a lot of engagement in terms of people across the organization contributing to this effort, because it begins to make sense to their work and they begin to see themselves in this work. The other thing we're doing is a pilot on data standards with Statistics Canada. And in this work, we're looking at the National Address Registry. And this pilot, our plan is to use this pilot again to amplify some of what we can do as we think of digital transformation and move forward on that. We've also put together a data and information management policy instrument because, as you know, with the rapid digitalization of a lot of our forms, there's a high increased need for mining through those forms, text mining, because it's just too cumbersome to be able to go through all those forms at once. So we've realized that, we're applying a lot of innovative methods on information and data. So we need some kind of guardrail around the use of that. The other thing we're also doing is a data integration pilot. As you know, if we're not integrating our data and curating our data properly and making sure it makes sense, we will risk, making wrong decisions on clients. We will be reporting news or creating performance measurement stories that do not make any sense. So we've put a lot of emphasis on taking just one key program and looking at how we can, really integrate data in a way that meets all the needs in the blue boxes I showed you, like the privacy, legal, and also allows us to look at some of the offensive strategies around data. We're also looking at the data literacy assessment, which we've run, and a whole bunch of data science pilots, which I could talk for hours about, but I know it's I wouldn't have time to go into all that, but the goal of all these initiatives at the end of the day is to create an amplification of some of this as we look into digital transformation, like the opportunities, to be able to show those opportunities and enhance them as we think through the future. So I will end on that note to give people time to, if they have any questions or comments or suggestions, and I will just go back and say that we haven't reached nirvana. None of this is at the point where we need to reach, but it's an ongoing conversation. We iterate through, we learn, and we keep going. So thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Ima. That was a great presentation. I really enjoyed that. And hopefully academia can be part of the resources to help improve the data literacy. You'll see some of the initiatives that are being promoted at the University of Ottawa this afternoon in presentations, especially by Vice Dean Leanne Payton. For digital transformation. Anyways, we got a lot of questions, so I'll just okay. First question: Are you able to share with us what's in your data literacy curriculum?
Yes, I can share that. What's the best way to?
Why don't you email it to me? And what happens
Okay.
is, if then what happens is I can email the participants.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, that would be great. For that, I think that'd be great. Next question. Um, Next question. Okay, in your organization, is the CDO considered the owner of the data, or other operational units? I think this touches the stewardship issue
Yes.
right point blank.
That's a really, really good question. So it's something that we're really shifting on now. So I mean, very timely question. So the way we see it, none of us own the data. This data belongs to Canadians. We see ourselves as stewards of data. So the model that we're really moving to is a model where you have the chief data office as the chief steward officer, basically. And all the different groups working on data are stewards. So they're key stewards across the organization of their programs. And we all want to have like a webbed connection where we're always consistently in touch, and we have a high view, like at the CEO level, and oversight over all the different activities going on. But we really do not want to promote the concept of people thinking they own that data, because we do not own the data of Canadians. We're there to steward this data and use the data in a way that's ethical, meaningful, meets all the privacy and legal considerations, but also helps Canadians, in reaching the best outcomes as we kind of deliver programs. So that's where we're going in terms of the thinking around stewardship and ownership.
Okay, thank you. Next question. There we go. With the hindsight of the last 16 months or so, what would you do differently to continue the acceleration to accelerate ESDC's Employment and Social Development Canada digital transformation?
Wow, that is another good question. What would I do differently? Man, I would bring data to the upfront. The what we learned really through the whole experience is just how important data is. Like, I always knew data was important. In the last 20 years I've worked in data, but it was so important in just in terms of being able to project, beyond the CERB, who are the potential people that would need the recovery benefits. So I would say embedding data not just as an afterthought. I would say bringing it right to the front in terms of when you're thinking through policy. So when you're thinking through policy, putting data in the front in terms of being a driver, as opposed to just being an enabler at the end of the whole process. So I mean, I would move data right to the front in terms of looking at all the considerations and the potential impacts, in terms of anticipating the needs, in terms of tweaking policy, tweaking our programs. That's what I would say.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, we got another one, which is interesting. I'm just going to paraphrase it. Does your department consider master data management part of governance and stewardship, or data curation, or a mix of the two, both in collaboration?
We consider the mix. So master data management, we're still working through that. I would say we're still working through that, because in the perfect scenario, we would have we'll have master data management. We'll be able to centrally manage client information in a way that really enables us, properly curate and really build trust around the data and that quality, and everything is interoperable. It speaks to, but the challenges, like I said, there are legislative barriers to doing some of this, the privacy considerations. So as we think through transformation, that is where the opportunity really is for us to really think through all this in a more proactive way. So as we look at the potential of building an MDM or a more centralized client data management system, how do we do this by and meet also, or maybe tweak some of the legislation to enable us do what we need to do? So for sure, I mean, the MDM, it's something that we're still thinking through for transformation. um, but again, good question, and it's something that's on our mind.
Okay. Another question is about artificial intelligence. I know the previous speaker, analytics is part of the job that he's functioning at. Um, right now is that AI is a function of data quality, and how do you design the AI at this point in time to take into account the data quality and also ensure the bias is taken into account.
No, for sure. I mean, with our use of AI now, we're not using it for automated decision making. Like at this point,
Mhm.
we're not using it for automated decision making. What we're using it for is more things like we're using text mining. So we're using it for text mining. We're using it to enhance some of the processing. So like some of the manual processing around our files, like using it for that. In terms of data quality, we have a whole team that's looking at data quality of our data. So with things like some of the benefit data we're looking at, we ensure that, I can go into a lot of details with this, but I know we don't have much time. But we have a whole methodology around data quality. The challenge when you're working in an operational setting is you need to understand that there's some realities of the data shifting, like the data shifting, because like I said, the context will always continue to shift. Like you have people who get a benefit, drop off the benefit, like the EI program. So you need to ensure that that context is embedded into the data. So we do not look at data as this, cold piece of information. We look at it as it's representative of an interaction of humans. So how do we ensure that we're bringing that context into the data as we're, looking at it, which is why I emphasize on data curation. This is why we need to do this. But as we look at digital transformation, there are ways to really engineer our data in a way that really enables us do less in terms of the back end work, in terms of putting together the data, integrating it, curating it. Somebody asked about MDM. So that's why I said, yeah, MDM is also on our mind. But a lot of that will support the challenge around the data quality going forward. In terms of the ethical considerations, 100% there, I agree. We work very closely with Statistics Canada on really ensuring that we're representing the population properly in terms of how we're examining and looking at analysis on that population. There are a lot of issues in the media, like it's every day we look at something comes up about data bias, AI bias. So it's something that's front of mind within our chief data office. And we've hired in a lot of experts also to look at some of those issues. But at this point, like I said, we're not doing we don't do automated decision making on that would impact delivery of benefits. So um, that's where we are there.
Okay, that's yeah. The next question is about proper sort of data quality related with respect to the benefits delivery modernization issue. It's also to how do you ensure that basically it doesn't get overwhelmed by technical focus versus client focus?
Good question. It's a balance. I would say it's a balance, and this is why within ESDC we have a multidisciplinary team working on transformation. So you don't have just, technical IT people or just data people. You have programs, you have policy. So it's a multidisciplinary team. And I also work with the executive team on the transformation side, to really bring in that enterprise perspective of data into the conversations.
Okay, no, that leads into the next question quite well. Is we're saying is how do you make sure that when you're taking a look at an enterprise viewpoint, that you prevent creating some more siloed viewpoints to an enterprise-wide viewpoint? What tactics have you found work best for that?
No, that's a good question. The emphasis, like I said, on from my perspective, is we need to remember we all have something in common. Like if you're on the operations side, you're on the policy side, you're on the data side, we need to serve our clients. We're serving Canadians. We're trying to get to that better outcomes. Like I have sat with people on the policy side, on the ops side, on the program side, and they all speak the same language at the end of the day. The focus is how do we really improve and enhance the outcomes and service to Canadians? So what I've found works is focusing on that core mandate. That is the core mandate of the organization. And even when you speak to people that are neck deep in, cloud, I need to be able to move this data into cloud or do my data migration into cloud. At the end of the day, why are they doing that? To improve efficiencies for Canadians. So it goes back to that. So what I've always done is gone back to that key, because that is what brings us all together. We want to really improve the outcomes of our neighbors, of Canadians, and focus on that as opposed to focusing on the thing, on the tool. And if you focus on that, you'll get logically to the best outcomes.
Okay, great. The next question is, everybody's suffering from data breaches right now. And how do you basically make sure that you do you do security analytics to make sure that you understand that the collection of data throughout the value chain respects Canadian policy, security policy?
So, I mean, I can't speak for my IT colleagues. Within ESDC, we have like a lot of expertise in on the security side. So we have a DG of security, cybersecurity, and I trust I trust their judgment, and it's their job to worry about that. But I think at the end of the day, is collaborating with them from a CDO perspective, collaborating with the people in ITB, my colleagues across the enterprise, and then making sure that in our guidance, so guidance around data management, because what I've found, like in a lot of these stories about breaches, there's something I've found in common is around the lack of data management. Like people are not managing data. That's the core of a lot of these issues. They don't understand the guidelines around retention, disposition. They're keeping data they don't need. They're collecting data they don't need. So a lot of secondary and tertiary data collections leading to some of these the big issues you find around some of these breaches. So again, data literacy on my end, really helping the organization understand the potential risks around data. There's value, but there's also risk. So really making sure people understand this, and then working with my colleagues on the IT side.
Okay, thank you. That sort of leads into the next one, which is interesting. Who in your organization basically takes care of data lifecycle management?
So we within the IT side, we have a group, an IM group, and they look at disposition, retention. We also have a privacy management group that, so this group basically puts together all the agreements because we have a lot of data sharing agreements across the enterprise. So as I said before, ESDC is a huge organization, and a lot of these functions exist in different parts of the organizations. From a CDO perspective, what I do is connect with these functions to make sure that we're aligned in terms of a lot of the guidance that we're giving and a lot of the work that we're doing. And the key here for me is that as we look at transformation, digital transformation, what is important is for us to make a lot of these processes more streamlined and more engineered and more intentional, as opposed to the practices of today where everything is siloed and compartmentalized, and then we have to actually make that effort to make the connection. So this makes it less of a burden to people across the enterprise and reduces a lot of the risks around security and inconsistent data management practices.
So I assume the library and the archives, records and archives group is within your organization?
Yeah, we have an IM group. We call it an information management group.
Okay.
Information management, yeah.
For that. Okay, the next question is some of the challenges for bringing segmented program level data analytics projects to the enterprise level. Um, how do you manage to do that, taking the lines of business that have their own analytics and bringing it up to an enterprise level so it's useful?
So, I mean, that's a good question. It actually depends because there's some analytics function that needs to happen within the programs. Like,
Yep.
for example, the ongoing operational monitoring. However, there's the more horizontal view. For example, I'll give you an example. So for example, with SERB or with the EI program, where people want to understand more of the demographical indicators. So for example, how are women faring? How are men faring? How are people of a certain age composition faring? And do people who have EI drop off at a certain point? That's where you need more of the horizontal perspective. And what we do is basically work with the program, so on the operational side, and then bringing that context into how we're representing the data. But we all use the same data. It's the same data we use. The difference is just the view of how we're presenting the data as we create our dashboards or our analytics and our research products.
I think part of the question also is when you create data, the newly created data from the analytics, is that managed, lifecycle managed as well?
Yes.
Okay. The next one's sort of a double-barreled question. First off, when you're creating the data inventory, do you have a metadata model?
So that's a good question, because for now, our key focus now is just understand the data holdings of a particular topic. The next step in that is to get a data catalog. So we're actually in the process of looking at the data catalog that will help us really put some of this information together. So that's where we will think through that. So we're not in that stage yet. But the key of this that I wanted to emphasize on is that transformation opens up a lot of these opportunities that we would have struggled with in the past. And that is where we will start thinking of things like, how can we do this in a more structured way, using things like a data catalog, using more of the tools that are available today to us. But the other key thing I wanted to really emphasize on in this conversation is the technology and the tools are not our biggest problem. The problem is ensuring that the information contained in there is properly contextualized, so that people actually are using the right information and making the right decisions that will impact Canadians. That's what the biggest problem is. And our challenge is to ensure that we're stepping through this process in a very intentional way, so that we're getting the information we need to contextualize the information. And then with the technology, we're focusing on a technology that will enable business, use this, not just creating something that nobody ends up using.
Okay, and that addresses to a certain part the data completeness um, for that, and just making sure you have the right data. I assume in your catalog that's part of the task. Well, this is this has been a great presentation. I really appreciate that. And like I said, hopefully we can use some of the material that you presented in the slides, as well as your comments, as an open educational resource. Because, like you said, the field, it's old, but it's emerging, and in certain
Yes.
areas, it's re-emerging as I
Yes.
think the digital transformation and literacy is increased over the years for that. So I thank you very much for your presentation. Um, right now, from a conference point of view, we're going to be going to a lunch break. We'll be starting at 1 o'clock. So with the next set of presentations, I hope to see you all there. In the meantime, Ema, thank you ever so much for
Thank you.
presenting. It's been great, and I don't have any other questions, but people can basically see you live. We'll be posting this recording on the CVent event site. So thank you very much,
Thank
and
you.
I'm just going to wait. If you could just go out a screen share, that would be super.
Okay.
And we'll just wait for a few minutes so we can get the technical people to stream without cutting anybody off. Okay, thank you very much, folks.